Hi guys. Since I put out that video about the issues in Venezuela, if you haven't seen it, I will put a markup on the top and you could go back and see it. I have to make some corrections, but at the same time, there are a lot of people who are suggesting the situation in Venezuela has a lot to do with the US demanding access to more oil, and I don't think the logic of that really flows. And I think it has a lot to do with the issue of the seen and the unseen. Frederick Bastiat was an economist, and he was the one who kind of pioneered this thinking that a lot of people, all they focus on is what is seen, and they don't understand the unseen. So, for instance, today on my Facebook, I saw people posting this image of the oil reserves around the world, which is pretty accurate. Yes, it's a very true statement. I think where's this? It's sourced from British Petroleum. It's accurate in terms of proven oil reserves around the world. And yeah, I'm by no means denying that Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and Canada have the largest oil reserves on the planet. And yes, the US, I think last count was probably closer to 55 million billion barrels of oil. But yeah, it's fine. They'll give it to them. But this is what's so misleading about this statement. There's an arrow there that says the United States consumes the highest share of world oil production, 20% of all barrels. So the thinking is that because the US consumes the most, and because they have, pretty, comparatively lower oil reserves, therefore their motivations in Venezuela are oil related. And that is based on, this information here. I suppose you can draw that conclusion, but that information doesn't follow logically. And this again comes back to the seen and the unseen. You can have proven reserves, but if you're not actually producing anything with those reserves, it actually has no reflection on how much you need oil. So there are some countries like Guyana, for instance, that has been proven to have massive reserves, but as of yet they haven't monetized any of it, and they're collecting no money from it. By that reasoning, would they be interested in some kind of intervention into Venezuela because Venezuela has huge oil reserves? No, of course, the logic of that simply does not follow. So, and again, something else that this does not take into account. I'm just going to switch over to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Is the issue of shale oil. So where that infogram is very misleading. It's talking about crude oil reserves, but the big boost in production in the U.S. has not come from crude oil and offshore drilling. Yes, there's been a lot of it in the Gulf of Mexico and other things, but it has actually come from a brand new technology, which is fracking and shale oil reserves. And that is actually what has pushed, as I'll show here, as we see here. Yes, so just quickly. So this is the United States. It is consuming, yes, about 20%. Of 20% of the world's oil. But here's what's not seen is which countries are the top producers of oil. And the United States is actually the top producer of oil, producing 16% of the world's oil. So if they're consuming 20%, and then they're also producing 16%, that means there's only 4% of their imports or their needs that isn't being met. And this was part of the correction that I had to make in terms of when I looked at the figures more closely on my video. I said that the US was a net importer of oil. On deeper reflection, it doesn't seem to be that's not the case exactly. They are still importing oil, and because the shale oil is not necessarily the same quality as Brent or light sweet crude. There are foreign refineries that could work better with that, so they tend to export the shale oil, and it's a very complicated market situation. But nonetheless, if you take into consideration that the U.S. is actually producing 16% of the world's oil and they consume 20% of the world's oil, that infographic does not look as menacing as the implication may sound. And again, what we also need to take into consideration into that equation is the shale technology. And as I pointed out here, there's a nice graph. I will put links to this below. Now, when it comes to shale, you must consider shale oil and shale natural gas. They're two different things. And here we have the United States is in fact the second largest producer of, has the second largest proven reserves of shale oil. And they have the fourth largest proven reserves of shale gas. So if you were to look at that and you saw that the United States was second in terms of proven reserves for shale oil and fourth in terms of proven reserves for shale gas, again, that will completely skew your perspective on what the U.S. production is really all about. It is the advent of the U.S. shale production that has basically boosted their petroleum output. It's also boosted their natural gas, but again, a lot that's not reflected in the figures. The shale technology has basically made the United States the world's largest producer of crude oil, even above Saudi Arabia. I thought it was below Saudi Arabia, but there's been a recent change. And just to give you an idea on the size of the reserves, again, I mean, this is a Wikipedia article about shale oil reserves. You can't really see that, but that's what it says, shale oil reserves. And the top four largest proven reserve fields are all in the United States. So, and this is a burgeoning new industry, brand new tech, well, not brand new technology, but new technology. There's a lot of growth and expansion. This field is expected to expand at 5% a year until I think the year 2030, definitely dwarfing any kind of shortages that I think the US might see. In fact, they are projected in some articles to have reached energy independence by the year 2020. So that's only 2 years away from this whole thing. So this perception that the U.S. needs the oil reserves in Venezuela is just simply, you're not really looking at the unseen, which is the production, the rising, and it doesn't even take into account the cost it would put in. If heavens forbid, the United States had to do some kind of military intervention in Venezuela to supposedly secure this oil, you're going to we've seen this kind of thing before, at least in perception, when the United States went into Iraq with Desert Storm, the first one with Bush Sr., and the fleeing Iraqi military set fire to many of the oil wells, and it took years for the U.S. military to go in and put out all of these well fires. So in the same case, it costs a tremendous amount of money in terms of equipment, manpower, and physical dollars for the U.S., when in truth and in fact, they're already getting most of their imports from places like Canada, Mexico. Finally, I want to look at where the U.S. actually does get its oil from in terms of its imports. So as I say, it produces basically 16% of the world's supply. Yes, it consumes 20%. So there is a 4% gap, and all of this information is readily available online here on the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and we could see it, right? So it imports, and this is in thousands of barrels per day. So this only goes up to 2017. The infographic was for 2018, so it is a bit skewed, but at the same time, I think we can get an estimate of where the bulk of the imports are coming from. So we see here from the Persian Gulf, it's what? 1,715 barrels a day from the OPEC producing countries. This is all of these countries: Algeria, Angola, Congo, and so on. All of them is 3,117 barrels a day, of which Saudi Arabia remains the biggest exporter to the United States. Followed by, yes, Venezuela is the second largest exporter to the United States. But many people are surprised by this. The U.S. buys oil from Venezuela. In fact, they want the U.S. to buy oil from Venezuela. Since their currency has been entirely debased, they need U.S. dollars in order to do any kinds of transactions because nobody wants to get paid in bolivars. So Venezuela is quite dependent on this oil revenue coming in from the United States. In fact, as of today, I think sanctions have been put in place saying that the U.S. is no longer going to buy Venezuelan oil, further putting pressure on the Maduro government to kind of step down. But these sums of 1,715 from the Persian Gulf, 3,117, right? The absolute biggest exporter of oil to the United States is by far Canada, a friendly neighbor to the north. And if you think about it, I mean, they've got the oil sands, they've got drilling and all of these other things. you really think that it's in the U.S. interest to go and have an invasion into Venezuela to basically, okay, let's say the production is cut and it's 1,618 barrels of oil from Venezuela a day. It would not be a major issue for them to increase purchasing from all of these other countries. And normally when this is the case, they usually get it from Saudi Arabia. The US and Saudis are very friendly with each other. But it would make so much more sense for the United States to spend the money to increase the infrastructure for oil flowing from Canada. So again, that is the unseen cost. This idea that they're trying to do it for oil, that's a very expensive way for them to go about to try and get oil, especially for not any major amount. As I say, yes, Venezuela does ship oil to the United States, but it is by no means the lion's share. And as the shale technology continues to improve, these import figures are probably going to be further on the decline. And they've been declining for some time. As you see from Venezuela, it's been going from 912, 755, 733, 776, and so on and so on. And it's been steadily declining. And these declines are probably going to continue as the U.S. Relies more on shale gas and shale oil to offset their petroleum needs. So, yeah, guys, I just wanted to kind of touch on this subject. I understand a lot of people, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, they don't necessarily understand the oil market. They don't understand these figures, and they just believe, and they want to believe, honestly. Orange man bad, U.S. is bad. U.S. does stuff for oil. But the logic of that doesn't really add up when you look at the figures in terms of the expected cost. If they really wanted to do a military intervention. So yeah, guys, that's my video. I hope this information was helpful. I don't actually trade oil, so that's why I made the mistake about where the U.S. production was in relation to Saudi Arabia, and I do apologize for that. But yeah, you just need to look at the basics of this, and you kind of understand that that's not the best idea for the United States. What's going on in Venezuela is not a coup. There's a very good video that was put out by this Venezuelan. She's a comedian, but she's Venezuelan. She understands it very well. I'll see if I can find it and put the links below. But there does seem to be some constitutional issues surrounding the Maduro's new cabinet, or I guess a National Assembly that he just kind of formed and filled it with everybody who agrees with him, and they kind of appointed him. So there may be grounds for a constitutional grounds for what's taking place in Venezuela. But yeah, guys, just wanted to put this out. Hope you liked it. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Hit the notification button if you want to get more videos like this. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. Take care.